Perfect. Thank you.
Well, welcome to our second session of World Arbitration Update in Asia. Today, it may be the morning in Asia, and as we are going in accordance with the Asian schedule, it may be around 10 or so in Hong Kong and in other countries in Asia, but it's 10 p.m. in the East Coast, and it's 4 o'clock or so in Europe. And our panelists are truly champions, because we do not only have panelists from Asia, like in the case of Elizabeth, but we're also accompanied by panelists in London and Geneva. So thank you for your flexibility. We are about to talk about artificial intelligence. What are the current and future possibilities of ChatGPT and predictive analytics for international arbitration? Of course, there could not be a World Arbitration Update without talking about ChatGPT. But I believe that the perspective will be somehow different, given the amount of information that we have now, the trials, what works and what doesn't work, and what could be the applications in international arbitration. I would like to introduce our moderator, who is in many ways the also the mind behind this ChatGPT panel, and also on predictive analytics. It's Kiran Gore, who has over the past 10 years developed expertise in public and private international law, foreign investment strategies, and international dispute resolution. Her current and past clients include governments, corporations, institutions, and private individuals. Kiran advocates before U.S. courts, ad hoc arbitration panels, commercial and investment tribunals, and investigative authorities. In addition, she also provides strategic advice on treaty law, conflict of laws, and legislative reform. Kiran is also a professor with a focus on international law, constitutional law, civil procedure, written and oral advocacy, and professional development. She teaches JD and foreign LLM students at the Georgetown Washington University Law School, and also undergraduate students at New York University's Global Studies Center in Washington, D.C. She is frequently invited to speak at conferences and publish articles on international law, international development, and dispute resolution. She serves as associate editor of the ICSID Review, Foreign Investment Law Journal, and associate editor of the CLUE Arbitration blog, and is a consultant to Walters Kluwer's International and Comparative Law publishing program. One thing that I must say is that whenever you get feedback from Kiran, you know that it's going to come with comments, and you know that the end product is going to be way better than what she received, because she has a very strict mind. She has, she's a wonderful editor, so I must underline that. Previously, Kiran was a senior associate in the Washington D.C. office at Three Crowns LLP, and before that she was an associate in the New York office of DLA Piper, and earlier in her career she was a judicial intern to Honorable James Francis, a magistrate judge in the Southern District of New York, and a law clerk in the office of the General Counsel of Michael Kors, a publicly traded luxury goods company. And with that, I would like to give the floor to Kiran and welcome everyone to today's second session of Asia Day in the World Arbitration Update. Kiran, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Jose Antonio. That was such a robust introduction. I'm blushing right now.
I'm so excited to be here to talk to you about this topic. I'll start with saying I have no special qualifications to be the leader of this discussion, other than I have immense curiosity in how different technologies can make my life easier, my work easier, and what I can do to teach or how I can approach teaching my students so that they're properly poised to become, tomorrow's lawyers and tomorrow's legal minds, and how they can help lead and be part of next generation legal teams. But what I have with me today is a rock star panel of people who are the ones who are using this technology, shaping this technology, creatively figuring out what various technologies can do for us as legal practitioners and arbitration teams. So I'm going to introduce them all very briefly. Of course, very quick bios so we can get on with the meat of the discussion. I'll go alphabetically by last name. So I'll start with Kelby Bayana. He's a paralegal specialist in the Americas group of Allen & Overy, or so it's known as at this very second, maybe, where he focuses on integrating technology, operations, and firm developments into the field of investment arbitration. Kelby's been at the forefront of training legal professionals on the latest technologies and adjusting his own working methods, and I suspect the methods of his teams to keep pace with these technologies. His expertise is in simplifying complex legal concepts, and he's helped to broaden the adoption of innovative solutions across the entire legal industry, both within and beyond the arbitration borders. So from Kelby, who I believe is here on the East Coast of the US, we're going to jump across the world and go to Elizabeth Lizzie Chen, who is a registered foreign lawyer based in Hong Kong. She is my former colleague, so I think she's brilliant, but she has practiced in 3 different jurisdictions: London, Hong Kong, and New York, at leading international law firms, including the so-called Allen & Overy, 3 Crowns, and Herbert Smith Freehills. She organized, and many of you will know her for this, she organized the first ever arbitration gathering in the metaverse in January. We are, again, going to hop across the globe to Sarah Chojecki. She is a New York lawyer, a former Swiss lawyer, and an independent arbitration consultant who is primarily based in New York City, but is currently in Geneva. So she's truly our rock star panelist, probably with a big vat of coffee next to her at the moment. She served as a member of counsel teams and tribunal secretary for cases in the energy, natural resources, shipping, commodities, and construction sectors. She is a moderator for the online community forum ArbTech. If you're not following ArbTech on social media and other places, you should be. They are the innovators who think about and are very passionate about technology's role in shaping the future of international disputes and the potential of technology to advance equitable access to justice. Sarah holds law degrees from the University of Geneva. I'm an LLM from Fordham University School of Law. Welcome, Sarah. Let's go now, still in Europe, to Dimitri. He is an independent arbitrator with Arbitra International and the founder of Arbicity, an online community platform for arbitration professionals. He co-founded the first technology company in his first technology company in 1996, and received a JD from Harvard Law School in 2001. For 12 years, he was a partner at Arnold & Porter in London, where he acted as arbitration counsel to many sovereign states and companies. He is vice chair of the SCC Arbitration Institute and is a member of the ICSID panel of arbitrators. For relevance of today's topic, it's important to mention that Dimitri is a member of the Silicon Valley Arbitration and Mediation Center's AI task force, and that his company, Arbicity, has been working to develop AI tools for lawyers based on those latest generative technologies. So already we have a pretty robust panel with different points of view and different approaches. I'm going to end with, last but not least, Isabella Yang. She's the founder and CEO of Arbilex, which has been working on the application of predictive artificial intelligence to high-stakes litigation since 2019. Their team consists of lawyers, engineers, and data scientists from Harvard, MIT, CMU, and in 2022, Arbilex launched the data-driven marketplace platform, which enables litigation finance and other investors to source better deal flow and underwrite litigation risks using its AI case rating system. Isabel has a JD from Harvard and a Master's of Science from the Oxford University. So I have not only thought leaders from around the world, but people with very positional differences in how they contribute to international dispute resolution from different areas of perspective. So I think that'll be really insightful as we look forward into what can these technologies do for us, and how can we implement them into our daily working methods. I think that's what our audience is most curious about. How can they benefit from these technologies? So I'm actually going to start off with Isabel, and I want to frame our discussion today in a past, present, and future framework. So we're going to start in the past. And Isabel, I want to hear from you about different kinds of AI technology. Of course, generative technology is not the only type. It is the newest and possibly the least tested, but it is what everybody is talking about today. So maybe introduce us to technology generally and tell us where we are at today in light of that with generative AI technology.
Thank you, Karen. Can you hear me okay? Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much for the invitation to this panel. And in my short career of working in artificial intelligence, I can say this is one of the most exciting and nerve-wracking time of being in the industry in the past 4 years. Before generative AI came into the picture, I think the AI landscape largely are understood to have two sets of models, the supervised learning and unsupervised learning. Within unsupervised learning, so far, I think in law, the use cases Kelby can speak more directly to consist of doc review, e-discovery. But the fundamental advantage of unsupervised models are they're capable of discern patterns when dealt with a large amount of data to train with without too much human supervision. But because of that, it tends to be associated with phrases like black box, unexplainable. And so far, I think they have been trusted with primarily lower level tasks, with automation being the primary goal. And then on the other hand, you have supervised model where it's really an advancement in statistics married with the upgrade in decentralized computing power. But within supervised model, you typically would have much more involvement of subject matter experts in building the model. And the advantage of having the subject matter expertise is you're able to work with a much smaller data set. And when you generate the output, which is typically predictive, you're more likely to be able to use explainability techniques to actually explain to users why the certain models are making certain predictions, because the humans and subject expert were so involved in building the model. And so far, sort of the type of predictive AI that Arbitration has been working on fall into the supervised learning model. So regardless of which generation of AI model we're dealing with, generative AI is a completely different beast in the following sense. And I just love for this opportunity to kind of open the discussion, and I'm sure other folks have many, many different perspectives. The number one difference is it's capable of creative output. Right? So previous generation of AI, the output is pretty much defined, right? Whether it's unsupervised model, you ask them to classify a picture. Is this a cat or is it not a cat? And then its output would be cat, not cat, right? You give it a prediction question. Is this case going to win? Yes, 60% chance, no, 40% chance. But at least the output is basically the question that you have specified within that very well-defined scope. With generative AI, anyone who has played with ChatGPT knows that the answer can really surprise you in ways that you don't even know that you can be surprised. So it's for the first time, the AI is part of the creative process. And that has all sorts of implications that I would love to hear the panel's input. Second thing that's really exciting and really different from previous generations of AI, it's its way of incorporating human feedback. It's basically natural language. Right? Previously, you actually have to work with specialist data scientists and engineers to actually give the model feedback and then fine-tune the parameters. Right now, everybody who has ever played with ChatGPT is training the model in real time in your own language. Right? So that's something that for the first time, the entire humanity is being the data engineer and data scientist informing the model. Is this the right output? What kind of improvement and tweaks you would like to see from the model. And there are actually online guides already about, here are some things that you can prompt the AI to say to get a different type of output. So that's really exciting. A third thing I would say, and I will end my remark there, is as exciting and nuanced and creative and human intuitive the interface might be, it actually creates a much more challenging task for evaluation. Because in previous AI model, there's such thing as ground truth. When you train a model, right, if it predicts this case win, loss, there's ground truth. Did the case actually win or did the case lose? If you ask it to classify a picture being a cat or not a cat, the human feedback can easily identify what is ground truth. There is a ground truth. This picture is the cat. This picture is not the cat. So for the first time, you have very nuanced output that actually no one knows what is right. And in fact, I think that even the founder and CEO of OpenAI would go so far as say, there will never be a ChatGPT model that the humanity will agree that is unbiased. Okay, so, and that's kind of, it's, so all of the above, the challenges and excitement, actually it's both sides of the same coin. So where do we go from here? I have no idea, but I know enough about AI to know that this time is very different. Like this is something very different from the past, very exciting, but it also poses all sorts of challenges that I would love to hear feedback from this panel about how they think about it. So I'll end there.
Thanks, Isabel, for setting it up so well with so much nuance. Let me turn now to Dimitri. And Dimitri, I think you have a background in computer science that maybe is unparalleled by the rest of us. So with that background, and of course, all the work that you're doing with AI in building different kinds of communities and integrate into your work, can you talk to us about why large language models are transformative, as well as what their current limitations may be? And I know you've been doing a lot of work over the past few weeks, just from what I've seen on social media and stuff, in relation to learning more about these technologies. So please enlighten us. Tell us where we're at and what are those limitations and opportunities.
Thank you, Karen, and I'm very grateful to Isabel for going before me and laying out some of the background. I think that supervised learning models will always have their place, and smaller special purpose models will continue to be effective and often the best at doing the specific thing that they do. But I think that the most exciting thing about the latest generation of large language models is that they are a foundation upon which so many useful applications can be built. And language is really the universal key that unlocks so much of what we do as humans. And it really cannot be overstated how important it is that machines have now learned to speak our language. ChatGPT is just the tip of the iceberg. There are many other models out there that are as impressive or almost as impressive as GPT-3 and 4. And I've had early access to ChatGPT plugins, which are going public quite soon. And they allow you to do things like summarizing and analyzing long PDF documents, incorporating up-to-date information with internet access, and leveraging connections with many apps that you already use, which again opens up millions of possibilities. I also participated in Google's recent showcase event for software developers and saw how Google is building generative AI into virtually every single product and service. And I'm sure Microsoft is doing it, and you will start seeing it pretty much everywhere you go. And for 20 years, Google search has served as the gateway to the internet for the majority of internet users, I would say. But in a very short time, I think much of our online experience is likely to be transformed and mediated by electronic assistants and co-pilots, similar to ChatGPT. And I think the legal profession is inherently conservative, but it is already being transformed by some of this technology, which is so new and so complex that even its creators are not quite sure what it's capable of. And I think it is important not to get carried away into thinking that AI is going to solve every problem, and to understand the technology and its limitations and risks. Before the technology can be adopted on a broad scale in the field of arbitration, it needs to develop into a more mature and customized solution for productivity. I'm sure many of you have discovered the limits of ChatGPT's knowledge and usefulness for yourselves. Problems such as confidentiality, hallucinations, and lack of specific and up-to-date knowledge are just some of the most obvious issues, I think, that you will find or have found. But I believe that technical solutions are already available or will soon be available to address all of these issues. And they're important to bear in mind. Later in today's session, I may have the opportunity to comment on how these issues might be involved and how the company that I founded, Arbitration City, is hoping to contribute to those efforts in making the latest technology safer and more accessible for professionals in our field. But with this, I will stop and turn the floor over to Karen and other.
Thanks so much, Dimitri.
panelists.
So I've heard from both you and Isabel now the hesitation, the excitement and the hesitation. So we're going to turn to the present landscape with Sarah. And Sarah, maybe you can introduce us not only to the different providers where the technology is built differently or modeled differently with different inputs, but also, you know, we're lawyers, so we actually care about the regulatory landscape. So tell us how different jurisdictions may be reacting to what we are all agreeing is a little unpredictable and unknown.
Yes, thank you very much, Kiran, and thank you, Isabella and Dimitri, for that lay of the land. And I think as you said, one thing that's really exciting is that now these large language models, LLM bots, speak our language. And basically anyone can actually, apparently, not that I'm a coder, but actually can code via language. So that's quite phenomenal what we're able to do. And when it comes to the legal profession, what these LLM bots enable us is to help us with legal research, document generation, general legal information, even, you know, like blog posts and so forth, and legal analysis. So the most famous example of these LLM bots, I'm going to focus on that first, is obviously ChatGPT 3, and then very quickly ChatGPT 4 came into the picture, but there's others models, as Dimitri said. There's Bing Chat, there's also Google Bard, and more law firms are starting to develop custom tools. So I will distinguish ChatGPT, Bard, and Bing to begin with. So it's interesting to note that they're based on different technologies. ChatGPT is created by OpenAI and uses that so-called ChatGPT technology. Bard is different. It relies on LaMDA and is developed by Alphabet and Google. Bing uses technology that has been provided by OpenAI and kind of relies on that and then kind of went on its own, as I understand it. Another interesting difference for lawyers and other users is that ChatGPT uses only text, but Bard uses text, images, audio, and more. So we can think of, for example, using depositions or different sorts of exhibits, visuals, and maybe possibly incorporate that as well in our analysis and presentations. Bing does text and speech. Another interesting distinction is between ChatGPT and Bard in terms of output. As Dimitri mentioned, ChatGPT sometimes can come up with answers or solutions that are actually deceitful or incorrect. They look absolutely perfect. There's nice footnotes. However, once you dig in deeper into it, it doesn't, it's just wrong. With Bard, Bard bases its assertions on external information sources. So maybe there's less risk. The hallucination is more like a ChatGPT thing. Then there's a difference in languages. Bard uses 1,000 different languages, which is quite impressive. And another final distinction I want to talk about is data that is used. ChatGPT's data is trained up until ChatGPT-4 is trained on data that goes up to 2021. And Bard uses real-time access to search data that it has. Also, other important things to know, and I think other panelists mentioned that earlier, is that ChatGPT is not confidential. OpenAI actually says on the platform that it reserves the right to have staff review inputs for safety monitoring and training purposes. And this is where custom tools actually might come in handy. Again, Bing Chat could actually, there's been some articles in the New York Times talking about how certain answers can be disturbing and create a false impression of sentience. And psychologically, this can also create a sort of distortion. And we are not sure exactly where will that go in the future if this technology becomes very mainstream, and how did that play in our thinking. And of course, there's the issue of lack of transparency and biases. I think we'll talk about that later. There's a computer scientist and professor at Princeton, Arvind Narayan, that puts it this way: today's AI model learning is uninterpretable, biased, and fragile. When it works, we don't know, we don't understand why. And that obviously for us lawyers, that's a huge, huge issue. Of course, in arbitration, we think due process, but not only fairness. And this is where regulations come into play. Stanford University index shows that there's now, since 2016, 123 AI-related bills, but no one of those are going as into depth as the proposed AI Act that's being put together by the European Union, and now is really in good path of being adopted. And the purpose of these rules is really to ensure that those systems are overseen by people, they're safe, they're transparent, they're traceable, they're non-discriminatory, and environmentally friendly. Actually, that's a pretty high task if we think today where we are with the models and what's going on. It's actually interesting to think that under the GDPR rules, ChatGPT was banned in Italy for a few weeks. And afterwards, the developers changed a few things, and ChatGPT again is accessible in Italy. But there's resistance, and the introduction of that law probably of the AI Act will change things. Also, what's important to keep in mind is that the proposed law is the rules follow a risk-based approach. And AI systems intended for the administration of justice are considered high risk. And we don't know yet if international arbitration will fall under that, but there's a possibility. And then if that's the case, those tools will need to comply with a stringent list of requirements. Really focusing on the quality of the data, the traceability, transparency, human oversight, cybersecurity, and many more. So it's a very robust act. So just very quickly, this is just, although that'll be the first very strong targeted law, other actually laws that we already have come into play, and we can think of the GDPR. Some institutional rules like the Shenzhen Court of International Arbitration start to talk about AI technologies, and that's one of the most advanced examples. And I think another good reference point are the professional ethics rules that limit actually what lawyers can do, and lawyers will have to abide by that. We can think of, under US law, competent and diligent representation, the duty to communicate. for example, a lawyer's duty to disclose the use of AI tools to their clients, and of course, again, the duty of confidentiality. And I pass the baton.
Thanks so much, Sarah. It's really interesting how these sort of open source models can interact with other regulatory and other areas of law. Of course, there's also custom tools. So one example is Harvey AI, which builds custom large language models for law firms to tackle their legal challenges in their practice area, bearing in mind their jurisdiction, the legal systems that they're working in. And I have read in Reuters and other places, and I was discussing this with Lizzie a few weeks ago, that there's a large waiting list for Harvey AI. Lizzie and Calby, of course, I mentioned earlier, are at Allen & Overy. So they've had access to Harvey AI for a while and have been testing how it's working in their practice. I want to hear from both of them, from the lawyer's perspective and the team management perspective, starting with Lizzie, sort of how you're integrating Harvey AI or other large language models or other similar technologies into your practice. What tips do you have for us? We all want to know. That's why we're here. It's the middle of the night. We want to know what we can do to gain and harness those benefits. So I'll start with Lizzie, and then maybe we can hear from Kelby afterwards about the team perspective and the management.
Thanks so much, Kieran. And building on everything the other speakers have said, actually, Harvey AI and other similar bots can actually do quite a lot. So I've got a suggestion of 10 things. So just to explain, so I was until recently at Allen & Overy, which was, I think, the first, if not one of the first law firms in the world to use Harvey AI. And I actually asked Microsoft being like, what really is the difference between ChatGPT 4 and Harvey AI, and it's actually not entirely clear to me, and maybe others will know on this call. Like I'm not entirely clear like what training data that Harvey has that is actually different to ChatGPT 4. Based on my use of both, I've actually found like both quite useful in the legal context. But Microsoft Bing did tell me that Harvey AI is more tailored for legal solutions, whereas ChatGPT 4 is more useful for general contexts. Either way, I'm going to talk about them in a more general way. And I should flag as well that when I was at A&O, I was actually part of our international task force looking at just reporting back on how our lawyers were using it in different jurisdictions and trying to come up with some best practices. But I should say I'm not actually at A&O anymore. So anything I say shouldn't be attributed to it. And just to preface before I give like my 10 examples, I agree with Isabella. Like what's really exciting about ChatGPT 4 and these other bots is the creative output that these bots can offer. And I also agree with Dimitri that we shouldn't look at ChatGPT and similar bots as being able to do everything. It's not like immediately replacing the job of lawyers, if ever, but it can already do many, many things that will make your work a lot easier. So there are a number of ways in which you can use them. First, take an easy one, taking notes. I remember taking notes of witnesses where, it was not always easy, like the connection wasn't always very good, or it would just take me a little bit more time to understand what the client was saying. And back in the day, we would be taking verbatim notes. But nowadays with Zoom, for example, you can use Fathom.video, which not only takes a recording of the meeting, but it will also have a transcript. And also it will produce an AI-powered summary. This is really powerful, not just for client interviews, but I'm part of lots of organizations, and we're able to effectively dispense with the secretary having to do the hard yards of taking minutes, and that has been a big time saver. Second, I think someone already mentioned like being able to use ChatGPT. I'm just going to use ChatGPT to describe bots more generally, but as the other speakers have mentioned, there's lots of them. One is taking a summary, so you can, I have a little extension, which means I can summarize news articles, I can summarize PDFs and things like that. But I would say I found it really powerful actually as a study tool while I'm studying for exams. But what I have found is that, for example, I used ChatGPT yesterday to to summarize a case judgment. I think it was pretty accurate, but it didn't quite tell me the point of the case. And I ultimately compared it with a news article that I was writing, and I thought the news article was still better at telling me what exactly was the finding of the judge and what was the reasoning. That said, I still found the summary to be incredibly helpful, and I can imagine the summaries will only become more helpful over time. Another limitation, at least with ChatGPT 4 right now, without any plugins I haven't explored yet, is there's a word limit. So I'm not able to feed it like, hundreds of documents or even, a 50-page PDF for it to summarize for me. So that's a limitation. Third idea is factual research. So I used it just to see, we had a trainee do some research on news or around a particular time in history. And then we also used Harvey, and Harvey's actually pretty good and came up with a lot of the same issues as what our trainee could do. I think our trainee ultimately produced the better work product, but ChatGPT is actually still very useful, and yeah, so what ChatGPT can do is still very useful, although there is that time limitation that some have mentioned. ChatGPT 4 is only up until September 2021, although there might be plugins that allow you to avoid that, or you can use Google Bard or something like that. You can also try using different chatbots, because they will come up with different answers as well. And another thing about all these chatbots is the incredible speed. You're not waiting for a couple of hours to get that work product. It's there for you in 30 seconds. And that can be especially useful if you just want a rough idea of, what the landscape is in a particular area of law or fact. Now, legal research, this one was of great interest to my litigation and arbitration colleagues, naturally, because that's a really time-consuming part of our job and what a lot of junior lawyers do. I think on the whole, we were still not entirely, at that stage anyway, still not entirely satisfied with what Harvey was able to produce. I think others have talked about hallucination and things like that. So what we found was that Harvey would make up cases that didn't exist, or it would quote from things, purport to quote from cases or other authorities that didn't exist, or the pinpoints would be wrong. You can ask Harvey or whatever. You can say, oh, what's your source? That said, it's not always wrong. It's just not perfect. So I think you have to adjust your expectations about what you're looking for. I still found it on tricky areas of law to actually be very useful as a summary of the areas of law, but you would probably still need a human to look at to assess the law. And one of the issues with Harvey too is that it was limited up until September 2021. So you're missing all of the case law after that. And I was not, as I mentioned, I'm not entirely sure what is the training data that Harvey has access to. But and the same with ChatGPT, I assume it's not going to have information that's behind the paywall on ISLG or Jusmundi or whatever. So a lot of legal cases are freely available, but a lot of them are not as well. So if you don't have access to that law, it's hard for me to see how, how you could remedy that data problem if the bot doesn't even have access to the raw material that you need it to have access to. But all is to say, I think with legal research, the issue is still that the incorrections make it less useful at this stage for legal research. And my fifth example is, just coming up with contractual clauses. Like you can imagine that sometimes you might want a bespoke clause that's in your procedural order number 1, or a bespoke arbitration clause. Something bespoke about using technology in your client engagement letters. I personally found that Harvey is actually very useful for coming up with ideas. I assume, for us to do it as a human, that's when I was working at a law firm, corporate colleagues would frequently ask, oh, have you seen these types of clauses? And I wouldn't necessarily have, but actually I think maybe Harvey AI has seen a lot. Or even if you use Google, you'll see a lot of templates, and it can actually suggest some pretty useful wording. And that's actually much faster than me like looking like, finding a search word on our internal database of like many different contracts and trying to find the specific clause that might bear some similarity to the situation that I'm in. I just natural clauses. And then quickly 6, ChatGPT and similar bots, very useful for coming out with counter arguments. So you can say, this is what I'm arguing in my case. Imagine that you are the defendant. What would you write? I was preparing last week for the SEAC Beijing Academy. I actually, it was quite a simple fact scenario, but it was so useful. I just fed the information to ChatGPT-4, it summarized each document for me. And then I said, imagine you are counsel for the claimant, what arguments would you make? And then I said, okay, now what arguments would you make if you were the defendant? Why did you mention that clause? Where does it come from? Like, oh, you mentioned force majeure, but actually there is no force majeure clause in the contract. So how are you relying on that? And it actually gave some like pretty intelligent answers. It really sped up my preparation for that hypothetical training. So imagine what it could do in a much more complex case. 7, you can use it to write articles or produce an outline or draft emails based on an outline. I personally think ChatGPT probably writes better than me. I like use it to write my LinkedIn post. I just give it a couple of bullet points and it spits out like something very coherent and well written. So I use that quite a lot. I'm not sure if I could write like a whole entire article, but you could ask it to help with like portions of things. And then 8, award writing and tribunal secretary work. This one I need to think a little further. And like, because I'm not sure how it could work. I mean, like, first of all, you have the client confidentiality issues, but assuming you get past that, it'd be pretty great, right? If you could get the AI to do, the parties details or the factual history or the procedural history, that would really save a lot of time. So that one, I think we need to think a little more about, and the same goes for drafting pleadings and things like that. 9 is, which is pretty cool, which is oral advocacy. So I don't know if any of you saw the Vismoot prep, but they actually had a ChatGPT be one of the teams. Like, so they had a human team and a ChatGPT team, except the ChatGPT team was played by actors. So somehow like the people trained ChatGPT with the Vismoot case material, and then the questions by the tribunal were fed to ChatGPT, and then the actors would read it out. And apparently, I didn't see the video, but actually apparently ChatGPT did a pretty good job, even though the judges gave the moot to the lawyers. And then last but not least, I think, images are really powerful. I think Sarah talked a bit about like Google Bard being able to use images, think about hearings, you could use AI to do these like pretty incredible visuals. Canva has, AI technology inbuilt, so it can create visuals for you. You can use Midjourney to create all sorts of different things. These are all really powerful tools that we could be using in oral advocacy. So thanks for bearing with me with that whirlwind. I hope that gives people some ideas for how they can use the technology.
So Lizzie, I was taking notes the whole time. I don't know if anybody else was, but I was typing away. If I had Fathom, maybe I wouldn't have had to take notes and it would have self-executed. Let me turn, Calby, clearly you have a different like positional perspective because you manage teams, you manage documents, oversee hearings, and do, I'm sure, a million other things that I don't even know that someone in your position would need to manage and make sure is done well to keep arbitration teams on track. So what's your perspective on large language models, maybe Harvey AI specifically, and maybe other tools, as Lizzie's described, that you are finding are helpful to you and your teams?
Well, first off, I think it's an exciting time because I've seen a lot of the technology come and go, and I've seen the hesitation. Years ago, you couldn't be a vendor and mention the cloud, and now everyone is on the cloud. Years ago, you couldn't mention artificial intelligence. You'd have to package it as predictive coding or machine learning because the word AI was a lot fairly scary to attorneys. Now it's a great time. This is the time to incorporate AI, but AI was around. Before in many different ways that we were just very hesitant to absorb it. But firms like absorbing or trying to use Harvey AI, and from what I understand, it is ChatGPT for a legal environment, but it's in a sort of closed environment, so there's no outside access. But I think it's really exciting what's going on. But from my perspective, I see it that it's being used. This AI system is being used in many different forms. For example, we recently had a legal week in New York, and there's so many vendors now who are trying to use some kind of open source platform, because it's not just so much the chatting, but it's the idea that you could have a no code sort of system and incorporate it into an existing technology. Not only the no code, but you could use more natural language. We were in discovery, we were sort of in this area where we could do a lot of fancy stuff with it, but you'd get these analytics and charts that would really not make as much sense to some people. So now that you can sort of just naturally ask the discovery platform, what are my key documents, or what are the documents being referenced by certain witnesses on a regular basis, and then have something spit out. It's almost like you have a little bit more of a human element into this computer that used to be fairly scary.
Thanks, Kelby. So let's talk about the scary for a moment, and I'm going to go back to Dimitri on this. So we've had a few mentions of what those scary things are. We have concerns about confidentiality. We have concerns about hallucinations, as Lizzie and some of the other speakers mentioned. The lack of specific knowledge, that is, GDPR and other, regulatory schemes, things like that. Dimitri, what are some of the technical solutions that can help us address those challenges and really, level up and supercharge our legal practice in the present environment?
Thanks, Karen. Obviously, confidentiality is the biggest stumbling block for using ChatGPT and other similar services. I think there are potentially several different solutions to that. One is by contract. So OpenAI, for example, and other companies are signing business customer focused deals such that they won't use whatever you send to them for training. They won't use it, they won't share it with vendors. So in the same way that you trust other cloud providers to keep your information confidential, OpenAI, I think, needs to work a little bit on their business facing, and confidentiality sensitive crowd, because the ChatGPT product is not confidential. They can use it. You can, your data is not safe and protected. They can share it with vendors. So using ChatGPT for confidential things, I certainly would not recommend it. A lot of law firms are now prohibiting it expressly. But you can, for example, if you have access to the application programming interface API, if you're building tools on top of GPT, that's treated differently contractually by OpenAI, and it is not stored on their systems at all, not used for training, not used for human feedback learning, and the other ways in which your data might be used. So there are and will be more contractual solutions. But as far as the technology is concerned, you can, of course, the historical way was to train your own model, host it inside your enterprise or in a trusted cloud. This is something that Bloomberg has recently done. If you've heard of Bloomberg GPT, Harvey, I don't know how it works behind the curtain. I suspect it's also separately lives in the cloud somewhere, even though it's based on GPT-4. It's not actually GPT-4 itself, but a version of it. Now, the problem is the models like GPT-4 have grown so large that training and hosting something from scratch, even if OpenAI would license it for you, is really prohibitively expensive. But you could potentially license it and fine tune it. GPT-3 allowed companies to fine tune with other, and fine tuning refers to essentially taking sector specific data or specialized information that the model doesn't have access to, and basically fine tuning it with that information so that it then knows your domain's specific knowledge. And that is something that, of course, for the legal field and arbitration field in particular, is great, but you need to still need to have, you know, a fairly large amount of data that's properly prepared, and then you could potentially host and fine tune a model. And now the other thing is there are a lot of interesting developments. Kieran, as you mentioned, in open source, there are now models which are very, very powerful, which are free to use by anybody. And the greatest thing about them is that they are very efficient, far more efficient than things like ChatGPT, which has, trillion, or billions, hundreds of billions of parameters. These models have a lot less, but they actually perform at levels of, 90% on some tasks of ChatGPT's effectiveness. There are other tools. There are anonymizer tools and other filters that you could potentially use. Essentially, there are a number of other technical solutions I don't have time to go into now, but probably the most interesting other one I would mention is something called retrieval augmented generation. That essentially involves hosting your own database of ground truth or knowledge about your domain. This could be your enterprise data, your law firm's data. It could be your company data, or even a specific data for a specific case that you're working on. And then what you do is you create something called a vector database or a semantic search database, where you can easily and quickly find whatever it is, in your data, whether it's structured or unstructured, find the relevant information, and then prompt the model, essentially include all your relevant snippets of data into the prompt that is then fed into the language model. So then as part of the context, so essentially it will know your information and your data when it answers your question, because it essentially is being fed the relevant chunks of your information in order to answer your question. And that can be extremely effective. And that also not only in some ways helps with confidentiality, because you are only passing snippets of information into the prompt. You don't need to send your entire corpus of data out. Still may be problematic, but we don't have time to talk about that now. But another great thing about it is that it helps to solve the issue of hallucinations, because you actually do have a source of ground truth to point the model to. And it also helps with other problems like a lack of specific data or up-to-date data. So this retrieval augmented generation with your own hosted database of information is really, I think, the way of the future. And there are many companies that are working on adopting these kinds of solutions, as opposed to what was previously done, which was build and train your own model or fine tune somebody else's model. I think this is becoming less and less the thing to do.
Thanks so much, Dimitri. So with that, I want to now gaze into the future. Clearly, we've all talked about, danced around how we're at a new horizon. So I want to talk about future opportunities, pitfalls, potentials, and I'll start with Kelby. Maybe Kelby, you can, we're talking about the beauty of bots. Maybe tell us about the pitfalls of humans interacting with these bots and what that can mean in terms of dangers, limitations, risks. I know we've all seen on the data analytics side, embedded bias and implicit bias are a challenge. When you're dealing with data sets, I imagine there's similar challenges with generative AI and other kinds of AI too. So maybe talk us through some of those issues as you've seen them come up.
Sure. The dangers, and one, I think I wanted to address the hallucinations, because as a paralegal, I deal with hallucinations all the time when I get a summer or first year associate writing something and I have to digest and check the briefs. In fact, there's an award out there, and I won't say which one, but there's an award out there that continues to cite the wrong, a document that does not exist, and it gets copy pasted over and over again. And as a paralegal, I keep finding it and I'm like, no one is catching this error, and it just keeps showing up. But to that point, I think it's exciting. There's a lot of limitations, and there's so much that you can do with technology. Like these companies, all of these companies are all trying to bring in AI in some form or fashion. Everything from do not pay to e-discovery platforms. Harvey's on this list, but there's also, and that was one of ours. But bringing AI also into hardware, you can have these cameras that follow you around, maybe for teaching purposes, but maybe for other things like security, identifying people. You can get AI now to figure out gender, someone's mood, their anger level, someone's trying to possibly come off as someone else. And that can be dangerous, but at the same time, it's like, well, how do we use this in the legal world? Well, there's a company that actually uses this when there's discovery, and for people who are working at home, it can tell who is looking at the document. And if you're looking at the document, it'll allow you to look at it. And if you're not, it's going to take a picture of someone and name that a confidentiality breach. So there's these AI that we can actually use to our benefit, because this is what discovery sort of looks like, and predictive analytics is a great tool and can be useful, but this is kind of hard to read. So if you can just bring in the ChatGPT into the platform here and ask it different things, then great. It becomes something benefit, because not everybody speaks sort of in this computer way. I use this on a regular basis with AI, like in Descript. Descript, what it does is I can record an entire session. I can completely erase a part of it, or maybe I say too many times. It can completely just take that out, and I don't have to be a professional video editor. I can just use it in my language. So it helps me sort of communicate. And to, I think Lizzie's point, there is actually a platform, Liquid Text does it, ClearBrief does it. We can put a whole bunch of documents into one location, and you can start writing something. Daniel went to the market to get milk, and it'll automatically detect where that source, where that citation exists, and start linking these sites. So now you can just draft without having to spend hours and hours trying to find that citation for a potential exhibit. I know I spent a lot of hours trying to find what is it that somebody was citing, what was the correct page number. So those are some of the things that I think it can be a benefit, but also then cause another excuse of like, is this a dangerous thing? Is this a limitation? How do we correct this? Now, another aspect is, of course, if you are using something as simple as maybe a video background. And I'll try to go ahead and do this here. Everyone is sort of familiar with virtual backgrounds. It's been around in Zoom for a very long time. And you can tell I'm not in San Francisco, right? But how good is this going to get at one point, right? You can tell I'm not on the beach, but at some point this is going to get good enough where sometimes it's going to confuse somebody. But what if I decide I'm going to also potentially use this so that I can look like I'm at a meeting and I'm just listening to a professor, or maybe I'm at a hearing and I'm actually not. I can do this with virtual backgrounds, and it looks like I'm there. So we can misuse technology for many different ways. It can be a benefit, but it can also be a dangerous thing, because what if that was a witness? What if what I'm doing is hiding a background and there's an attorney there feeding me notes, feeding the witness notes? So there's all this stuff that we have to sort of understand the technology to know, well, what are we actually looking for?
So later this week, I have a final hearing that's virtual and I have witnesses testifying. So now I'm completely paranoid. So thanks for that, Kelby. So on that note, let's turn to Lizzie and Sarah. What do you think there need to be guidelines for arbitration practitioners? Maybe we'll start with Lizzie and then go to Sarah.
Sure. Kelby, I loved your presentation just now, by the way. With the background, I need to learn this. So quickly on guidelines, I think I'm thinking about this just in the international arbitration community. And while I don't think we need to regulate or guide the use of AI for its own sake, I do think it would be helpful to have some guidelines on what we think are fair and appropriate uses of AI. Kelby has already flagged, a couple of issues. We've talked about limitations of AI. It might be helpful to make these more explicit. And I think the other thing that can be really helpful from having guidelines is that it might actually encourage the use of AI. I think in arbitration, sometimes we can be quite conservative. So, we don't, tribunals have probably always had the power to issue, I don't know, interim relief or emergency relief, or, summary, some form of early dismissal or something within their inherent powers. But we kind of feel more safe if there is a provision in the rules that specifically allow you to do something. So my thinking is whether it would be helpful to have, guidelines like the IBA guidelines, like the guidelines of the use of tribunal secretaries, not necessarily in hard law, but forms of policy documents that just sort of explain what the landscape is, explain what the applications are, and then set out appropriate uses or not, sort of not unlike the IBA guidelines on conflicts of interest with the traffic light system. So you could think of guidelines being useful in terms of, drafting or producing pleadings, analyzing documents, writing awards, gathering, authenticating evidence, language translation. I haven't, given all of this complete thought yet, because I don't think we should just be regulating AI and we're requiring its disclosure when we don't normally require people to disclose AI. We don't require people to say if they're using Westlaw or whatever in their research. But I certainly think it would be helpful to think about soft law or policy documents that might appropriately guide the use of AI for the benefit of users, parties, counsel, tribunals, experts, and basically all actors in our field.
Thanks so much, Lizzie. Let me turn now to Sarah. Same question, but maybe let me add another gloss, which is equity. How can AI help us to create equity amongst practitioners in the legal field more generally, from more of a global perspective?
That's thanks very much, Kieran. That's a great question, and a difficult one, because there's a discrepancy in access to technology, and that could create a real imbalance between players. So how are we going to ensure that? And I think that that kind of creates a risks of potential grounds for procedural challenges. And that's something that, we as that arbitration community want to avoid, or potential annulments. So that's something maybe that the rules or guidelines, as Lizzie say, maybe like soft law, could could address, because the principle of fairness needs to be preserved. And I think one thing that I want to add as well, and why I think it would be actually quite helpful to have such guidelines, is that today, businesses, and especially tech businesses, are looking for disputes that are resolved in the same way that they are used to deal, according to their own values. So I think there'll be really value to implement those methods, integrate that to expand to those businesses and reach to that new era of AI and new technologies. And I think now there's an expectations that dispute resolution mechanisms also would integrate those solutions and reflect the parties' needs and values, and not just a strict application of the principles of due process.
Thank you, Sarah. So before I go to my last few questions, I'm just going to put a shout out there that we welcome questions in the chat, and we're going to have time for Q&A at the end, but you have questions already burning. And feel free to share resources too. I just saw, Dennis, you shared this Wall Street Journal article, which I clicked into, and it's scaring me a little bit. And let me go now to Isabel. What are your thoughts on future opportunities? You started off this webinar telling us that the technology was a little unstable, a little unpredictable. As it becomes more reliable and clear, what are some examples of future uses that you can maybe see, given that you work with AI kind of all the time?
I actually have nothing to add in terms of the use cases I can think of. Beyond what Lizzie has outlined in terms of law. I think that was a brilliant summary of possibilities. I don't think generative AI is like the unpredictable kind of mess of, the feature and the bugs. I think they will forever be intertwined. I think because the output is so creative, the evaluation is by design always going to be complicated, right? And so the only time when the evaluation of a model is simple is when the output is binary, and when there's ground truth that you can compare the model output to. And for as long as generative AI remains creative in its output, remains nuanced and surprising in its output, the evaluation will continuously be a challenge. But that's the beauty of it, I think. I think it creates opportunity for us to really take a deep look at our community and our society and try to come up with a set of defined values. And I don't think any one society will ever come up with the same yardstick by which they would judge generative AI. But I think this is an opportunity for us to really take a look at our value system and start engaging in those conversations. But even at its best, I do not think that generative AI will ever arrive at a time where its evaluation is as metric-based and as objective as supervised model and unsupervised model. And I think that's just a cost of innovation that we have to accept as humanity. But in the same time, it brings up so much more like creative energy and opportunity. So I think it's just, embrace the complexity, face the complexity, but get ready for some really challenging conversations about this new technology.
Thanks, Isabel. It's really insightful. So let me now go back to Kelby for the final word. Kelby, what about other technologies? What are other things that we're really focused? I mean, a year ago, we were all talking about the metaverse, and now everybody's forgotten about that a little bit because they're so distracted by ChatGPT-4. What are other things that are about to hit us that maybe, Jose Antonio and Ian can be taking notes for what their next panel discussion topic is going to be?
Well, I truly believe that it's going to be a combination of AI and something else. For example, right now in project management, clients have been using drones for mining and finding gas leaks, using LiDAR scans of entire uh, areas to do whatever their project is. But you can use AI in drones to have them automated. You no longer have to have a pilot. You do it once, and then the AI will adjust. It will adjust depending on the weather, on the climate. So it can do something a little bit more automated, and it sort of takes away the need for human touch in that respect. But then also you could use it in the metaverse. We've figured out that you can use sort of the metaverse in reverse, where you are using the metaverse to actually control a unit, a robotic or some kind of environment, and you have that explore an actual world via a metaverse. You can also use AI and other robotics, like Amazon's been doing a lot of that with their automated robots and trying to have shipping and products and things like that. So I think AI is going to start developing in various different formats. And like that Wall Street Journal article was talking about, like they're using AI not just to replace like a look. Like I can change my look here, and that's fairly simple to use. But and you know, if I want to go confidential, I can go confidential. I mean, that's a very simple thing to do. But if I want to talk as Professor Stern, I could do that. I could capture her voice, I could capture her look, feed it in. So that variation is going to happen, and you see this a lot. I think Morgan Freeman's a one that's popular, that goes around all the time. And those are going to be kind of those things where like it's going to be AI used with another AI, like one maybe a photographic AI with a voice, and then maybe a transcription, and maybe with a language, and it's going to be a combination of them all used in a new up and coming technology.
Thanks, Kelby. So that's all the questions I had for everybody. I'm going to open up the floor to all you speakers. Anybody want to add some final remarks before we turn to any questions? I think there are a few starting to come in, but last thoughts? No. Okay, I'm going to go to the first question that's in the chat box, which is from Sophia. She says, or Sophia, if you want to take yourself off mute, I'm happy for you to say your question and share it if you wish.
Hello, everyone.
Hi, go ahead.
Hi. Sorry, I'm not putting myself on camera. It's a bit late here in New York. But just my question is, first of all, thank you. Great presentations. I was following with a lot of interest. On the issue of perhaps putting together data sets and availability of reliable information to create those data sets. So Lizzie mentioned the issue of much of the resources in arbitration being behind a paywall. I'm thinking that this technology could be easily adapted, specifically LLM technology, to create sort of bespoke legal research tools that we could use in arbitration. I wonder, what are your thoughts on the confidentiality of commercial awards, and whether that would be an issue in creating sufficiently large and reliable data sets or not?
Go ahead, Dimitri.
Hi, I think that's a fantastic question, and one that I have actually been spending a lot of time thinking about. What I actually favor and am hoping to find others who are willing to join in the effort is to create an open data initiative for arbitration in particular, and to have something to allow us to create a data set that is anonymized and that draws on the various information that is out there in the public domain, and again, potentially anonymized data from institutions and other sources of awards and other materials, so that anyone can use it to build applications, to fine tune models, and I think that is going to be really important for the arbitral institutions to put something out. I am a member of the SCC task force on transparency, and there are many others efforts I think that are going on with other arbitral institutions that might help. But I think there are solutions, and I think that there needs to be a great degree of collaboration and communication in order to have the kind of data in the quantity and the quality that is necessary to make real use of effective use of this technology for our field. The better it's the common adage of garbage in, garbage out. And if you have bad data or insufficient data, then these tools just don't work.
Thanks, Dimitri. Anybody else want to add 2 cents, or shall I go to the next question? Go ahead, Isabel.
I think just to add to the question of data curation is something that we spend a lot of time at Arbitration thinking about. It's not just about quantity, it's about the representativeness of the curated data of the entire sample. So if the curation process consists of some sort of bias, for instance, if the awards that tend to be okay, like if the parties in an award that have some tendency to want to share with the rest of the world, if those cases tend to be, larger or like involve certain states, then you're training data on those particular subset of awards, then end up overfitting the model, then you might as well just like not train that to begin with. So I think it's not just about the quantity. I know like confidentiality prompts us to think about a lot about what is a minimum amount of quantity. I don't think that's the right question. Even if you have the minimum quantity, you should still probe about, do you actually have the representative sample that is giving you the true distribution of decisions that you're dealing with before you even jump to the question of quantity? I think the quantity is like a second order question. The first order question is, what is the quality of this data? Does the curation process have any inherent bias? If no, then we can move on to the quantity question. So I think I wouldn't jump directly to the quantity question.
That's a great comment. And it also relates directly to the other question in the chat from Dr. Kishore, which says, what are possible epistemistic and cognitive disadvantages to using such technologies, right? So it's about we already discussed, some cognitive biases that can get built into the models, insufficient data sets, or how those data sets are programmed. Anyone on that add other views in response to that question? Some of the disadvantages of such technologies? Okay, nothing further there. Are there any other questions? Feel free to go off mute if you wish to share them. Otherwise, we're exactly on time. It is now 11:20 p.m. here on the US East Coast. So I might hand the floor over to Maria Lucia to put us into our breakout rooms, I guess, for some informal networking. Thank you all for joining us and for this enlightening session. I'm sure we will have, Jose Antonio, another session in the future that may progresses things even further. And I really am really glad to have this opportunity to be involved and hear from these great speakers.
Kiran, thank you so much for moderating this, because you definitely moderated with lots of curiosity, and that is, as so many things in life and academics, the key to progress and to keep the audience engaged. I learned a lot, and I definitely want to see the video with our own AI tool on transcripts downloaded when it comes out. So that's a little bit of an ad. Voicica will be downloading all the videos, and all the videos will have their own automatically generated transcripts, etc., so as to contribute to the generation of technology. But thank you, everyone, each one of you. And now we're going to move into the breakout rooms. For those of you that can stay, do not feel compelled. If you're just about to see the birds start singing and the sun rising in Geneva and in London. We'll miss you. Thank you so much. And again, it was a fantastic session. I think that everyone should see it. Next time I might appear here or a visualization of me in our next panel. Take good care. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.